Before we get started, this video is actually a request by the wonderful Subscribe Star donators. This is something I want to talk about for a bit, so I'm super excited. With spooky season soon to arrive, it's time to take a look at one of the best shows HBO ever made. Well, at least the first season.
That's what you all want to hear about, right? Dora Lang, kids in the woods.
The occult, ritual, murder. You can thank the advertiser for that.
You know, there was a time that men didn't air their bullshit to the world. You know, it just wasn't a part of their job.
I can be hard to live with. I don't mean to, but I can be critical.
Revival ministry, old-time religion. You can imagine what Mr. Charisma thought of that.
One monkey looked at the sun and told the other monkey, he said, for you to give me your fucking share. So goddamn frail, they'd rather put a coin in a wishing well than buy dinner. I mean, you never know what the thing's gonna be, do you? A little detail somewhere way down the line makes you say, breaks the case.
Yep. True Detective, a show that is a strange enigma. For those unaware, True Detective is the anthology police drama series on HBO, created by Nick Pizzolatto. The idea behind the show is that each season would be a self-contained story of detectives attempting to solve a case, with more and more layers being added to it thanks to their own personal flaws and inability to balance their lives with their careers. There are currently 3 seasons, but the one most everybody prefers and only really ever talk about is the first one. I will mention the other 2 towards the end of the video, but this is gonna focus completely on the first season since it's the only one I truly recommend and feel is the definitive story. Other seasons are, to put it bluntly, more like cash-ins on the name recognition, and they have some serious issues, but that's all for later. So True Detective Season 1 was directed by Cary Fukunaga and written by Nick Pizzolatto, also starring Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. The story follows 2 homicide detectives across the span of 20 years as they encounter a strange ritualistic murder in the backwoods of Louisiana, and their attempts to investigate the murder grow increasingly tense as their relationships and professional lives start to fall apart. And it's only made worse as it seems the murder is tied to a much larger and far darker secret than either of the 2 men could have ever expected. To get it right out the gate, I love True Detective, the first season at least. It's an extremely well done murder mystery thriller, a genre that I'm a pretty big fan of. Stories of hunting serial killers, crime procedurals, mysteries, I can't get enough of this stuff. And what makes True Detective all the more interesting is that it manages to be a very grounded and authentic crime story while also dipping its toes into some downright supernatural territory, but I'll save that for later. Don't want to spoil anything. For now, all you need to know is that this is a show that cares about the details, which is to be expected due to the director. Cary Fukunaga is flat out one of my favorite directors of all time. The dude has made so many different gems that I fucking highly recommend, to put it lightly. You have this, Maniac on Netflix, which is a fantastic miniseries, Beasts of No Nation, which is just outright one of my top movies, period, and he wrote the script to the first part of the It remake, which I argue is one of the reasons it was half as good as it was, and my evidence is how part 2 ended up sucking by comparison. Just saying. Point is, this dude is not an idiot when it comes to his job as a director. I know a lot of people gave him shit over No Time to Die since, admittedly, that was pretty mid, but I'm willing to blame the studio on that more than anything. The guy has way more wins than losses, so no point blaming him for something that was probably a nightmare to work on, thanks to studio interference and them wanting to clearly insert a political bend to the movie to appeal to social media. It was pretty blatant. And it's also kind of ironic because he got Me Too'd after the movie anyway. Whether that's true or not is up in the air. Tend to view allegations on social media as a bunch of vipers hissing at each other. Listen to everything but trust no one, people. You won't regret it. Still, True Detective was one of the first big projects Fukunaga worked on, and it's really the one that got his name out there. He did do some short films and 2 features before this, Sin Nombre and Jane Eyre, but True Detective was the first major hit with the masses, mainly due to it being a crime drama with recognizable names tied to it. It's the first normie project he did, which is kind of a blunt way to describe this. True Detective isn't just a murder mystery, there's a lot of subtext in this show, mainly due to its ties to cosmic horror and H.P. Lovecraft. That's right, this is actually inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft and Robert Chambers. I'll talk about it more in the spoiler segment, but I should warn this is not explicitly a Lovecraftian series, at least not in the way you think. Don't go in expecting tentacle monsters. Instead, True Detective is a story about 2 men. 2 very flawed, almost broken men. Matthew McConaughey plays Rust Cole, and Woody Harrelson plays Martin Hart, 2 Louisiana state homicide detectives who encounter a murdered girl in 1995. The story follows them from 1995 to 2012, and we see the impact their investigation has on their personal lives and vice versa. This is one of those shows where each episode leads to the next, building a larger story with every chapter, and we see the consequences build higher and higher until it becomes just way too much to handle. Now, an interesting thing about this show is that it's not a straight timeline. The framing is an interview Cole and Marty give to the police 17 years after the investigation in 2012. There's a lot of jumping back and forth between the 90s and 2012, even sequences where Cole and Marty outright lie in their interview while we see what actually happened. It's a good way to mess with the audience's expectation and show more of the protagonist's true natures deep down, because what makes True Detective Season 1 such a powerhouse are the characters. Woody Harrelson and McConaughey steal the show to the point they were nominated for awards, and they carry a lot of the weight in each scene. That's not to say the other characters are bad, some of them are pretty great, it's just that these 2 are the obvious standouts. Their chemistry props up each scene, and you get a real sense of how much these 2 men contrast each other. Marty is the typical southern good old boy type, someone able to walk into a room and get a whole pack of buddies real fast. He likes to drink with his friends, watch sports, and go home to his wife and daughters. He's also a piece of shit cheating on his wife, and he's not very subtle about it, to the point that everyone can see it. And worst of all, he seems almost entitled to the idea of blowing off some steam before he goes back home. It's not just that he's fucking another woman on the side, he feels as if he's owed that by the world. By contrast, you have Cole, who's barely even human by the time you get introduced to him. Cole is a shell of a man, completely consumed in nihilism and essentially just waiting out the clock until he finally kicks the bucket. He's a complete asshole, someone that just drags down everyone else and does not form relationships well. But you do see that he's got a ton of baggage behind him, dealing with a very heavy loss, and frankly he's just burned out with the world. Also, he's sorta off his rocker crazy, like full-blown hallucinations. He's not okay. Granted, this is mainly due to heavy exposure to drugs due to his history in various task force before he showed up in Louisiana, but nevertheless, he's still cuckoo. But as you can see, there's a lot to these guys. They have a very rich history that make them feel like authentic people, and they avoid being basic stereotypes you would see in any cop show. In fact, a heavy emphasis for the show is to explore just how flawed these guys really are. They're great detectives, but as human beings, they are monumental fuck-ups. Their issues only escalate until it's directly impacting their ability to investigate murder properly. Cole, with his obvious depressive issues due to personal tragedies, penchant for alcoholism, and struggles with reality, not even mentioning the drug problems, it's to the point that the guy is bordering on being suicidal. In fact, he has made some hints towards the idea.
I think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming. Stop reproducing. Walk hand in hand into extinction.
What's the point of getting out of bed in the morning?
I tell myself I bear witness. The real answer is that it's obviously my programming. And I lack the constitution for suicide.
And Marty, who's supposed to be the straight man to the very eccentric Cole, has major marital problems to the point that it's basically about to explode. Add that with his burnout from working homicide for so long, his infidelity, his anxiety of his work trying to leak itself into his daily life. Yeah, it's not great. All he wants to do is forget about the things he's seen when he goes back home, but it's not that simple. His own children are showing signs of being traumatized by it. It especially doesn't help that they're working on a murder case in the backwoods of the bayou. They have to bounce between working class communities that aren't used to such a disturbing event, or the grimy and crime-ridden shitholes that do not like the police and will not make their jobs easy. They also face a strict time window, and apparent interference from third parties that want to impede the investigation as much as humanly possible. The stress these guys deal with is beyond description, and things only get worse as the case steadily dips into full-blown occult territory. Now, before I talk about the actual spoilers to True Detective, I do want to talk about the technical aspects real fast. For one, the show looks great. It has a very rich vibe behind it, fully taking advantage of the setting. You see the thick swamps of the Louisiana backwoods, along with the smaller towns and local folk that fill up the place. Not everyone is a movie star or looks like a model. There's a clear attention to making the characters look and feel like human beings that just happen to live in a rural area. The violence is also very matter-of-fact and pretty damn brutal. I can't show any of it without revealing major character deaths. Just know that it's not afraid to blow the chunk of a dude's head off in a gunfight. Not the whole head, just a chunk. And that's probably one of the more forgiving deaths of the show. It's a grim story, so the subject matter isn't fun at all. At times, it can almost feel like a docudrama, just going through different ghettos or crime-infested chunks of a state and filming what happens. Now, I don't know how authentic True Detective's portrayal of homicide investigations are to real life. I mean, some elements are very blatantly played up for drama, which is to be expected of a drama show, but apparently Fukunaga actually consulted with Louisiana State Criminal Investigations for the show. Still, people that actually work in this field will probably have tons of fun pointing out all the inaccuracies and how things actually work. Personally, there was never an element that made me roll my eyes or think they were explicitly breaking reality for the sake of the show. At least not in a way that the show itself doesn't point out, like how the protagonists lie under oath, go behind their superior's back, or Cole deals with hallucination. It still firmly falls into the exaggerated but not completely idiotic territory, which is the golden zone. Of course, there are numerous scenes where the two do shit that is flat out illegal and will not fly under any circumstances, but the story is well aware of this and the two make sure to go out of their way to not get caught while doing them. But despite all their efforts, it still all comes crashing down regardless, mainly due to their own flaws as human beings and a very, very bad thing that the two work to cover up. I've danced around this long enough. I think it's time to explore the story more in depth and talk about the actual spoilers. Granted, the show is like 8 years old now, but it's a murder mystery thriller. Explaining the plot ruins it. I highly recommend you guys sit down and watch True Detective. It's a fantastic series. If you've already seen the show and just want to hear my opinion, that's cool, but please watch this if you have not. It's only 8 episodes and it does not waste your time. It's a great show.
Yellow King, Carcosa.
Nut job.
So the actual conspiracy that Marty and Cole have to dig up is pretty fucking dark. To put it bluntly, it's a collection of families that kidnap, rape, torture, and murder women and children, all in a ritualistic cult sense. And the members of the conspiracy reach as far as the governor of Louisiana to a religious organization with ties to private schools across the state. The victim that Cole and Marty find in the beginning of the series, Dora Lang, was murdered not by the cult, but someone tied to the cult, sort of a product of their actions. The two men had the chance to uncover everything in 1995, but due to an incident when they tried to arrest one of the men tied to the cult, a convict by the name of Reggie Ledoux, who was proven to have some involvement in the murder, the leads went cold. To put a very long story short, Reggie Ledoux was the cellmate of Dora's ex-husband, who showed him pictures and unknowingly put her on the cult's radar. Once Reggie was let out on parole and started his meth operation with the Iron Crusaders, him and his friends kidnapped Dora, raped her, and then tortured her to death. They also kidnapped 2 local children with the intention of doing the same. They managed to kill a local boy, but Cole and Marty intervened before they could kill the girl. They had Reggie arrested and handcuffed, and were seconds away from arresting a second associate, but unfortunately, Marty spots the children on Reggie's property, and in an absolute rage, he executes him by shooting him in the head. Cole then helps murder the second man, though that ends up becoming kind of an accidental death as the suspect steps into a tripwire. Yeah, he turned into mist. And they both worked to cover up what happened, claiming they were shot at as soon as they arrived on the property and had to kill the suspects to survive. At first, it seems like they were able to solve the case and get justice for Dora Lang, but there were a ton of hints left behind that they missed something. For one, every person they interviewed mentioned Dora going to a church, and when they later find the burned out ruins of a church, supposedly the one Dora went to, even though that location had been abandoned for years, they spot a mural of a woman with antlers praying in the exact same position they found Dora's body. They also find her diary filled with references to a place known as Carcosa and the Yellow King. At first, they write it off as delirium brought about by Dora's history of drug abuse, and instead think it's proof that whoever took Dora kept her drugged up in order to control her. However, it might be a little bit more literal than they think. It especially doesn't help that they discover ties between the Dora Lang case and Marie Fontenot, a 5-year-old girl who went missing under mysterious circumstances. Though when they go to investigate that, they're assured that she simply ran away from home to live with her father, but there's a lot of hints that there's even more bodies they just haven't stumbled into yet. You see, a big mistake that Cole and Marty make is they write off details in the case due to being too abstract to consider, such as how around the same time Marie went missing, another child in the area claimed they were chased through the woods by a green-faced spaghetti monster. Of course, that sounds like complete nonsense and something that a little kid would just dream up to get attention, but then those details come screaming back once there's the right context to put them in. Carcosa isn't just nonsense, it's a literal place where the Yellow King took his victims and murdered them. The green-haired spaghetti monster makes sense when you see that he's a man with serious facial scars who works as a handyman in the area. He was green because he has a green jumpsuit and he's covered in green paint. The Yellow King is the name given to the serial killer Errol Childress. The ritualistic murders by the Yellow King and the cult were covered up by the state elites, even as the killings started to dip further out of the state, creating a pattern that Cole is finally able to latch onto and start to follow, which, ironically, causes the Louisiana police to start suspecting him of being the killer. Most of these details are out in the open and very obvious, with a cult member who is actually a well-known religious figure in the state, Reverend Billy Lee Tuttle, immediately demanding a task force to investigate anti-Christian crimes, when there was no proof the murder was motivated by hatred of religion. Showing something about it spooked him, plus the ties to the pastoral group from both the victim and the killer, with Errol Childress working as a landscaping contractor for the pastor, with a very clear pattern of his activity and disappearances in the area. Dora Lang went to a church tied to Tuttle, and Childress is tied to Tuttle due to both families being involved with the cult. In fact, it's heavily implied Errol was tortured and raped by the cult when he was a child, but was allowed to live due to being blood-related, which is something that might just be a family tradition. And the damage followed him and his friends to adulthood, where they decide to murder women and children in the same manner, thinking themselves to be gods and prophets, even worshipping the concept of death and seemingly of the belief that time is a cycle that will repeat over and over again. Even if they die, they'll just repeat the cycle with no power to change it, repeating every action every moment until they meet the same ending.
I know what happens next. I saw you in my dream. You're in Carcosa now. With me. You'll do this again. Time is a flat circle.
What's that, Nietzsche? Shut the fuck up. Put it down!
Now, some of you might be feeling some serious cosmic horror vibes from this, and that's very intentional. As stated, this is pretty heavily inspired by Lovecraft. The cult and serial killer are blatant references to their works. Also, to Robert Chambers. Putting aside the themes of nihilism, existentialism, and jabs at human nature, which were constant themes in Lovecraft stories, hell, The Yellow King is a direct reference to the story The King in Yellow, a short horror anthology about a play that drives anyone who reads it completely insane. It's where Carcosa comes from too, being described as an ancient city that's both glorious and horrifying. The videotape Cole finds in Tuttle's house can also be seen as a reference to the play, since it contains the rape and sacrificial murder of Marie Fontenot. You never see the tape play out in full, but every character who views it breaks down screaming in horror at the contents, and Cole admits that he had periods where he thought he just went completely insane. There are so many different nods to old Cajun and voodoo folklore, mixing it together with cosmic horror, creating this unique and unsettling vibe. It doesn't help that Louisiana is just creepy. Look up pictures or tours of old abandoned plantation houses. Something about the vibe of that place just puts a chill up your spine. Now, as stated, do not go in thinking you're gonna see a Shoggoth. This is not what the show is actually using these themes for. The cult believes these things are true, but the show kinda makes it clear that they're insane and detached from reality. They believe it, but it's not real. And the elites involved in the cult are doing it purely because they're sadists who get off on it, and really the spaghetti monster detail is both a Chekhov's gun and sort of a fun joke reference to Cthulhu, since the Childress family lived in Louisiana since the Pilgrim days. The joke being that Cthulhu is an ancient one, an entity that existed before humanity, and Errol's family lived in that state before anyone else.
My family's been here a long, long time.
There might be some signs that they aren't completely full of shit though, if you want to look at it from a meta perspective. They claim time is a cycle and they've seen events before they happened, and you can kind of think of that like how you rewatch a show. You know the twists and what's going to happen since you've already watched it, but you can't change anything because it's already edited together and set in stone. Every time you rewatch the show, you're putting the character through the exact same events again, as like an endless cycle. It's sort of a fun reference to the idea that you're watching a mystery show where you know all the events coming up. That's just a way to look at it though. I don't think it's the actual thing they were intending. Still, it gives the killer's personality. Childress' monologue in the final episode is fucking haunting, as Cole chases him into Carcosa, a tomb built on the Childress property from the settlers centuries beforehand.
You know what they did to me? What I would do to all the sons and daughters of man.
The supernatural elements don't have to be real to be unsettling. You just need characters who believe it's real. A cult abusing women and children is something that happens in real life. Some even say they're still doing it to this day. There are very real cases of these events happening, and that's the scary part. You don't need a ghost or a vampire to make a good horror story. Sometimes all you need to do is remind people that certain individuals are just fucked up. Nothing can be scarier than what your neighbor is capable of. Now, I mentioned that I would talk about the other seasons, so let's get through this real quick. Season 2 of True Detective came out just a year after the first, and right out of the gate, it's a stark difference to the first one, which makes sense. This is an anthology. The entire idea is that each season is a different experience. For one, Nick Pizzolatto had a lot more creative control over the season. Before, he had to share it with Fukunaga, but come season 2, he was given a stronger voice when it came to production, and I think you can tell when you sit down to watch through it. As stated, one of the more interesting parts of the first season was the unsettling and macabre tone. The murder investigation was the first layer to what Cole and Marty were getting into, since it went way deeper than they expected, but with connections to the cult and the Yellow King. Season 2, by comparison, is a lot more grounded in reality. A lot of those supernatural elements are dropped for a more in-depth exploration of the characters. This time, the protagonists are played by Colin Farrell and Vince Vaughn. Now, both these guys are pretty fantastic actors. In particular, I really like Vince Vaughn's more dramatic stuff. Check out Brawl on Cell Block 99, Dragged Across Concrete, or his performance in Hacksaw Ridge. The guy clearly has chops for serious drama, something I'd say fits him better than comedy. Still, an issue I have with Season 2 is that without that connective tissue that the first one had, it's really hard to hit the highs Season 1 did. For one, the chemistry between McConaughey and Harrelson was lightning in a bottle. The way their characters could bounce off each other was part of why Season 1 worked so well. Marty was a piece of shit, trying to pretend he was a decent guy, and he wanted to judge Cole for not conforming with the rest of the cops at State CID. Meanwhile, Cole never needed to pretend to be anything other than what he was, and his eccentricity was a major factor for how he was able to find out about the conspiracy and the Yellow King. Season 2's protagonists are considerably more broken. Like, how the fuck did Colin Farrell's guy not kill himself? I mean, it gets pretty egregious with the melodrama. Now, Season 1 used melodrama well. The entire point is that it was honestly a waste of time and distracted the men from the larger investigation at hand. They let their personal problems get in the way of their jobs, and innocent people suffer because of it. And it was only once they were removed from it did they see how badly they fucked up. Season 2 sorta embraces melodrama, to the point that it can kinda almost feel like a soap opera at points. It's not awful, but coming off Season 1, it can definitely have moments where it gets a tad self-indulgent. It also makes protagonists harder to sympathize with. I do like them. Vince Vaughn in particular plays an interesting character, a criminal trying to go straight but is dragged into this whole mess. But Season 2 also kinda drags. It's weird because it's the same amount of episodes, but it feels slower and almost boring at times. It probably doesn't help that the setting is changed from rural Louisiana to California, so you go from a setting that has a distinct charm and personality to a bog standard one, which isn't even really that fair since it's not like you can't make interesting drama in California, just that, once again, a lot of what made Season 1 cool is missing. Really, I do feel like if you start True Detective at Season 2 without seeing any of the others, you'd probably like it a lot. Some people outright think it's great, it's just it has to compare to a phenomenal season, and the reviews weren't exactly kind to it. Some outlets even saying it was the worst show to come out that year. I had my problems with Season 2, but goddamn. Now, Season 3 came a full 4 years after Season 2, 2019 to be exact. This one is sorta meant to be a return to form for the show, bringing the series back to a lower scale and in particular bringing in more writers to help filter Pizzolatto's ideas, since the network believed the reason for the lackluster second season was due to him having complete control with no one to challenge him. Cary Fukunaga is a pretty visionary director himself. Whatever he's in charge of it. One of the reasons he got booted off the It remake is because he kept fighting with the studio because he wanted that movie to be a lot closer to the book, so they just dumped him and used his script. And it's pretty obvious that he took Pizzolatto's script and adapted them to fit the show he wanted to make. You have two talented guys able to build on each other's strengths, and it's very clear that the series massively benefited from this partnership. Season 2 still had some shining moments. Pizzolatto has a lot of talent as a screenwriter. The problem was it felt unfocused in parts. Now, Season 3 is an improvement, and it has hints of wanting to bring back that unsettling element, but it's still very much grounded in reality. It's still basically just a cop drama. One that really came out a few years too late. By the time Season 3 was announced, all the hype for the show was gone. And it sucks, because Season 3 has some pretty damn good elements to it. For one, you have Mahershala Ali, and he is fantastic as the leading man. Now, the last two seasons focused on a partnership / a small collection of individuals looking into a particular case. Season 3 mostly focuses on Ali's character across the span of like 30 years, so it's more about him and his regrets than anything else. It also brings the setting back to rural America, this time in Fayetteville, Arkansas, so you can already tell the murderer is Boogie. Jokes aside, you can feel how hard this wants to bring back the spirit of the first season. It clearly realized what made people fascinated in True Detective, and basically tries to reignite the same spark. And while I'd say it doesn't fully hit the mark, it is substantially better than Season 2. The focus is tighter, a lot of the melodrama is cut down, or at the very least actually has a point now. I'd say that Season 3 earned a lot of the reviews it got, getting critical acclaim when it came out, and people calling it a return to form for the show. I wouldn't go that far. I mean, Season 1 is still the season to define the series by, but 3 absolutely works as its own thing. And really, all 3 seasons are worth a watch. 2 is not perfect, you might think it's mid, and 3 just does not reach the highs that 1 does, but still a pretty great series if you're into murder mysteries. This is definitely one of the more out there series to get into, just with how uneven it is, going from a masterpiece to a pretty good show to a great one. It's a weird rise and fall deal, like a boat on a wave. Still, I want you guys to check this show out, at the very least Season 1. It's a fantastic series that you can treat like a mini-series if you really want to. With the whole thing being an anthology, you don't have to worry about characters you like being flanderized or a retcon ruining a piece of the story. They're self-contained and fully capable of standing on their own as good shows. And the first one is such a fascinating, spooky look at why Cajuns are not people. You can find the show on HBO Max, Amazon Prime, or your preferred torrent site. Please take the time to check it out and tell me what you thought. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys.
What is this, some kind of hillbilly bunny ranch?
Excuse me. You might want to talk to Sheriff Bilson before you start tossing accusations around.
No, I got nothing against hillbillies.
Hey, loser, do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I am now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.